There are some places that feel wrong before you ever learn why. Sometimes it is the silence. Sometimes it is the way a building seems to sit there untouched while everything around it has moved on. And sometimes you see something looking back at you from a window and you realize you were never supposed to notice it. A long time ago, I briefly lived with my good friend Ben on a quiet street in Northville, Michigan, not far from Detroit. It wasn't exactly a nice neighborhood. The house we rented wasn't anything special either, and neither of us had much money at the time. We were young, broke, and working the same job, so splitting a place together seemed like an easy decision. Ben and I had known each other since we were about 9 years old. We had grown up being the kind of kids who were always getting into something, so living together felt natural. But almost immediately after moving in, we noticed something about the neighborhood that neither of us had expected. Across the street stood a creepy-looking house surrounded by overgrown grass and thick, untrimmed bushes. It looked abandoned. Then we started noticing that several other houses nearby appeared to be abandoned too. Some had been left sitting there for so long that the entire street seemed strangely frozen in time. On one of the windows of the house across from us, there was graffiti. More graffiti covered part of the fence. The neighbor on one side of our house didn't make us feel any better. We barely spoke to them because something about them made us uncomfortable. On the other side lived an older man named Marv. Marv was difficult to forget. He had long gray hair and a long gray beard, giving him a distinctly hippie-like appearance. He seemed friendly enough, but there was something strange about talking to him. Conversations with him never felt completely normal. On our second day there, Ben and I spoke with him after work. Naturally, the abandoned house came up. Marv told us it had been abandoned for as long as he could remember. At the time, that answer didn't seem particularly important. By that evening, it would become the first piece of information we wished we'd taken more seriously. The sun was almost gone when Ben and I sat outside on the front stoop, smoking and talking. The street was quiet, the daylight fading, and the abandoned house across the road was becoming harder to see clearly. Then I looked up. Something in the upstairs window caught my attention. At first, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Then my stomach tightened. I stood up so quickly that I threw my cigarette onto the ground and crushed it beneath my shoe. Ben looked at me. "What?" I pointed across the street. "Do you see that? There's someone at that window." For a moment, I was certain I wasn't imagining it. There was a face staring through the lone upstairs window, and it was staring directly at us. Ben immediately turned toward the upstairs window. But before he could see anything, the person moved their head away. The window glass was too foggy and dirty to make out much of the figure. I couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman, young or old. I couldn't even say what the face looked like. There was only one thing I knew for certain. I'd seen the eyes. They had been fixed on us. Ben looked back at me. "You are legitimately creeping me out." I wasn't laughing. Neither of us knew what we had seen, but I believed it was a person. I had no explanation for why someone would be inside a house that supposedly had been abandoned for as long as Marv could remember. So we went to the only person nearby who might know what was happening, Marv. We hurried over to his house and knocked on the door. Nothing. We knocked again. Still nothing. That was strange because we could see Marv inside. Through the window, we could see him sitting in his tiny, messy living room with the television on. He was there. He simply wouldn't answer. Ben and I stood outside staring at the window. The whole situation had suddenly stopped being funny. "Dude, what the _ is going on with this place?" Ben said. We eventually left Marv alone and went back home. But the image from that upstairs window stayed with me. The house had been abandoned. At least, that was what we had been told. Yet somebody had been standing there. And whoever it was had been watching us. Ben wasn't willing to leave the question unanswered. He owned a katana, which he had brought with him to the house. And before long he suggested something that, looking back, seems completely insane. We should go inside. We had been adventurous and daring troublemakers as kids. When something frightened us, our instinct had never been to walk away. It had always been to find out what was happening. So we decided to cross the street after dark. Ben brought the katana. We both carried heavy-duty flashlights capable of illuminating almost any room. The backyard of the abandoned house was overgrown, and the darkness made everything feel more isolated. We found the back door and broke off the board that had been holding it shut. Then we stepped inside. The first thing that struck us was the dust. The house looked decrepit, as though nobody had properly lived there in years. But there was something else. Despite the graffiti outside, The interior seemed surprisingly untouched. There were no obvious signs of vandalism. No one had torn the place apart. Nothing immediately suggested that someone had been living there. That somehow made it worse. Our flashlight beams moved across the rooms as we joked nervously about getting the hell out of there. The first floor was tiny. There was a kitchen, a small living room, a dining room, and one closet. There was no basement. We checked everything downstairs. Nothing. Then we looked toward the staircase. There was only one place left to search. Upstairs. We moved toward the stairs as quietly as we could. The house seemed to absorb every sound. Our footsteps were small and careful, and the beams of our flashlights climbed the walls and disappeared into the darkness above. Neither of us knew what we expected to find. Then Ben did something I still can't explain. He suddenly called out, "Is anybody up there?" I turned toward him. "Dude, why the ___ would you do that?" My voice was quiet, almost a whisper. And then we heard it. At first, there was nothing, just silence. Then came the sound from above us. Rapid stomping. Someone was moving upstairs. Not slowly, not cautiously. The footsteps sounded heavy, fast, and deliberate, as if someone had been standing somewhere above us and had suddenly started running toward the staircase. The sound came closer. My entire body locked up. For one brief moment, I felt like my heart had stopped. We had entered the house expecting to find an explanation for the face in the window. Instead, we had discovered that we might not be alone. Ben had the katana, yet he was the first one to run. He grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the stairs. We didn't wait to see who was coming. We didn't wait for the person to reach the landing. We didn't even try to investigate further. We ran. The flashlight beams bounced wildly as we rushed back through the rooms we'd just searched. We went straight toward the back door, through the opening we'd made, and out into the night. Then we ran across the street. Only when we reached our own house did we stop. We were trying to catch our breath when something made the entire situation even stranger. Marv was standing by his window, watching us. He didn't call out. He didn't come outside. He simply stood there, looking at us. Ben and I froze in front of the house. We had no idea what to say to him. Only minutes earlier, we had been inside a supposedly abandoned house. We had seen nothing downstairs. We had heard someone, or something, running upstairs toward us. And now Marv was standing in his window, watching us return. There was something deeply unsettling about the fact that he had seen us. He had refused to answer his door earlier. Now he was silently observing us from inside his house. Neither of us wanted to cross the street again. We went inside our own place. Whatever curiosity had driven us into that abandoned house was gone. The mystery wasn't worth finding the answer. That night, neither of us called the police. We also didn't go back across the street. Instead, we made a decision that would have seemed ridiculous only a few hours earlier. We were leaving. Not eventually. Not after finding another place. The next day, we contacted the landlord and explained that the location was simply too inconvenient for us. We needed to leave as soon as possible. The landlord was given the explanation, but the real reason was something we didn't want to discuss in detail. We had walked into an abandoned house across the street. We had seen a face watching us from an upstairs window. Then, after entering the house ourselves, we had heard heavy footsteps running toward us from the floor above. That was enough. Whatever had happened inside that house, neither Ben nor I wanted to be involved with it. There was no second attempt. No return trip during daylight. No knocking on the door. No investigation to determine who had been upstairs. We simply decided that staying there wasn't worth the risk. Looking back, the strangest part may have been how quickly everything changed. When we first moved in, the neighborhood had only seemed run down. The abandoned houses, the overgrown yard, the graffiti, and the strange neighbors were things we noticed but didn't consider dangerous. Even the conversation with Marv hadn't immediately seemed important. He had told us the house across the street had been abandoned for as long as he could remember. Then, only hours later, I saw somebody looking out of its upstairs window. A face. A pair of eyes. Someone watching us from a building that supposedly had been empty for years. When Ben looked, the person had already moved away. Then Marv wouldn't answer his door, even though we could clearly see him inside watching television. At the time, we didn't know what to make of any of it. But after hearing those footsteps upstairs, we stopped trying to explain it. The next day, we packed up and left. We didn't linger around the property. We didn't look through the upstairs window again. We didn't cross the street. We got into the car, drove away from the house, and never looked back. There was no dramatic confrontation. No final discovery. No explanation waiting for us. Just an abandoned-looking house, a face behind a dirty upstairs window, footsteps that came running toward us in the darkness, and an old neighbor who watched us from his window afterward. That was all we ever knew. And maybe that's what made the experience so disturbing. If we'd found somebody inside the house, at least there would have been an explanation. If we'd discovered that the property wasn't actually abandoned, the mystery would have ended. But we didn't. We never learned who, or what, had been upstairs. We never found out whether the person I saw in the window was connected to the footsteps. And we never understood why Marv watched us from his window after we escaped. All we knew was that something had happened inside that house. Something we weren't willing to investigate twice. Years later, the memory of that night still stands out because of how ordinary everything had seemed at first. Ben and I hadn't moved there expecting anything unusual. We were two young friends trying to save money, working the same job, and sharing an inexpensive house in a neighborhood that wasn't exactly thriving. The abandoned house across the street was simply part of the scenery. We noticed the overgrown grass, the bushes, the graffiti, the empty-looking properties nearby. But none of that prepared us for what happened after sunset. I still remember looking across the street from the front stoop and seeing that upstairs window. The glass was too foggy to identify the person. I couldn't tell their age. I couldn't tell their gender. I couldn't even describe their face properly. But I remember the eyes. They were looking directly at us. Then, when Ben turned to look, the figure disappeared from view. That should have been enough to make us stay away. Instead, our curiosity took over. We crossed the street after dark, broke the board holding the back door shut, and entered the house with flashlights and a katana. The interior was dusty and decrepit, but strangely untouched. We searched the first floor. There was no basement. There was only the small kitchen, living room, dining room, and one closet. Everything was quiet. Then we headed upstairs. Ben called out, "Is anybody up there?" And something answered, not with words, with footsteps, heavy footsteps. Rapid stomping from above us, moving toward the stairs. We ran before we ever saw who was making them. Back across the street, we stopped and tried to catch our breath. And there was Marv, standing by his window, watching us. We never learned what he knew. We never discovered who had been inside that house. We never found out whether the face in the window and the footsteps belonged to the same person. And we never went back to find out. The following day, we told the landlord that the location was too inconvenient and that we needed to leave immediately. Then we drove away. That house disappeared behind us, and neither Ben nor I ever looked back. Maybe there was a perfectly ordinary explanation for everything that happened. Maybe there wasn't. But there is one detail that has always stayed with me. An abandoned house is supposed to be empty. And when you hear someone running toward you from an upstairs floor you thought was empty, the last thing you want to discover is whether they're actually there. We chose not to find out. And sometimes, leaving a mystery unanswered is the closest thing you get to an ending.